This is Evolution of James Cameron, The Amazing Spider-Man.
Our story opens with Peter Parker, an isolated, awkward nerd who's being raised by his Aunt May and Uncle Ben. They're great people, but they're about 20 years past their prime to be raising an angsty teenager. One day at school, Peter is picked by Mary Jane Watson, a girl who he's had a crush on all year, to be her partner for their science project. MJ needs an A in the class so she can graduate with a B average, because if she does, her parents promise to buy her a car. Later that day, Peter goes to an honor student seminar at a nearby university. The group tours the lab complex and even gets to see a restricted area where genetic experiments are being performed on fruit flies. And Peter watches a spider that snuck into the fly habitat eat one of the flies. The group leaves as Peter whips out his camera to take some pictures for the school paper, when the spider drops down from above and bites him. By the time Peter gets home, he feels faint and his vision is blurry. He pulls his clothes off and collapses on his bedroom floor. The next morning, he wakes up in just his boxers, about 80 feet up, on a high-tension tower. This spider bite is making him feel very sick. But before he heads to bed that next night, he does notice some good that came from it. He could now see perfectly without his glasses. The next morning, Peter wakes up in his own bed, but he and his sheets are covered in a sticky white substance. He notices that it's coming from his wrists. Horrified, he rushes out of the house, running blindly in a singular direction. He eventually bursts onto the street right in front of a speeding truck. Instinctively, Peter jumps and lands on the side of a building, 20 feet off the ground. Peter begins to test his abilities, wall climbing, web slinging, his incredible strength. What was once horror is now exhilaration. At school, Peter tells his biology teacher that he wants his and MJ's project to be about spiders. MJ is grossed out, but Peter needs to learn more about himself. That night, Peter skips doing homework, continues to test his powers, and eventually winds up at MJ's house, where he watches her through her window as she disrobes and gets ready for bed. Uncle Ben loses his job, so in an attempt to make money, Peter begins street performing with his powers, wearing a stocking over his head to keep his identity secret. He eventually upgrades to a red and blue dance skin that he adds a web pattern to. Peter's alter ego, now known as Spider-Man, becomes something of an icon within the community, performing at parties and going on public access variety shows. In an extravagant Manhattan mansion, the powerful and wealthy Carlton Strand watches Spider-Man on a bay of 20 TV screens. He turns to his right-hand man, Boyd, and tells him to find out anything he can on Spidey. Strand was originally a basic criminal, but about 10 years ago, while on the run, he found himself inside of an art installation that attracts lightning right when it was struck. After this accident, Strand found himself with the ability to control electrical energy. He can sense it in wires and walls, he can touch phone lines and hear calls, download data by touching a hard drive. Anything you can think of with energy, Strand can do. And he used this power to take over his gang, changing it from a small-time syndicate to a multi-billion-dollar mega player. Using his abilities to steal and manipulate data, he's unstoppable. In school, Peter's grades are slipping in every class except for biology. MJ at first hates Peter for volunteering them for such a disgusting project. But Peter's personality eventually wins her over, and she starts to warm up to him. As Peter and MJ walk out of school, they're ambushed by MJ's boyfriend, Flash McCreary. He's a jock, a stud, and a snob. Peter can't stand him. He ridicules and threatens Peter, and as he turns to leave, he sees Flash slap MJ in the face. That night, Spidey delivers some karmic justice when he ambushes Flash outside of gymnastic practice. He beats him semi-conscious, destroys his car, and tells him to stay away from MJ. Later that night, Uncle Ben enters Peter's room and tells him that despite being a little past the age to be able to help him navigate growing up, that he is there for him. Peter tells Ben that he's okay, and Ben leaves, knowing that he failed. Spidey continues to spy on MJ and comes to find out that she has a home life full of abuse and toxicity. After one of his late-night appearances, Spidey is approached by Strand's associate and lover, Cordelia, who offers him a card which reads, "There are others like you," with an address and a time for a rendezvous. Spidey tries to follow her out when he's attacked by Boyd. He tries to fight back, but with every punch he throws, his fist sinks into Boyd's body and is covered in sand. Meanwhile, Boyd is throwing punches that hit like he's made of concrete, and that's because he kind of is. Boyd has the power to soften his body into sand or harden it into rock at will. Eventually, this Sandman sifts himself through a grate in the ground and escapes. Television shows won't pay Spider-Man for his appearances since he won't reveal his identity, so he has a sleazy booking agent cash the checks for him. One day, Peter has Uncle Ben drive him to the agent's building under some pretense so he can collect his money. Spidey enters the agent's office only to find that this sleazeball is out of business and broke. The agent tells Spider-Man to beat it, and not willing to reveal his identity to get the money himself, he has no choice and leaves. As he does, he notices a robbery in progress, and that the thief has a tattoo of a cobra on his hand. The criminal flees, and the security guard chastises Spidey for doing nothing to stop him. But to Peter, it wasn't Spider-Man's job. As Peter leaves the building, he finds a small crowd of people gathered around Uncle Ben, who was waiting to pick Peter up, lying on the ground, shot by a carjacker. Spider-Man tracks down the killer to a warehouse only to find the thug with the cobra tattoo. The killer shoots at Spidey as he weaves through the bullets and webs the guy up. He delivers the killer to the police, and the cops tell Spider-Man to pull his mask off. But he refuses, gets physical with the cops, and flees. That night, a local TV station owned by J. Jonah Jameson runs a story about the two cops that were assaulted by the mysterious figure known as Spider-Man. From here, Spidey goes after criminals with reckless abandon, becoming a one-man war on crime. He tears through criminals single-mindedly and viciously. During this campaign, he comes across two cops beating somebody up, and swiftly webs the cops up, which makes Spidey now a wanted criminal. He can't make any more public appearances since he's a criminal, the cops hate him, and every time he stops a criminal, the cops hate him even more for making them look ineffective. Jameson is spinning a narrative of fear around Spidey, and on top of that, he has to deal with the actual bad guys. But in some communities, Spider-Man is a local legend. While working on the biology project, Peter finds out that MJ is actually a big Spider-Man fan, because she knows what it's like to have to wear a mask. Spidey begins to follow her one day when thugs attack her. He intervenes, defeats the attackers, and whisks MJ away. They wind up sharing a tender smooch over the top of Spidey's mask. Spider-Man heads to the rendezvous point and is met by Cordelia and Strand. Strand explains that he's looking for exceptional people who were also touched by fate. Boyd, for example, was a maintenance man at a big military research project and got caught in an experiment's explosion that merged his molecules with sand. So Strand took him in and showed him his way. He also apologizes on Boyd's behalf for the fight earlier. Strand just wanted to see if Spidey would fight back against somebody as strong as he was. Strand, similarly, wants to take Spidey under his wing, and tells the webhead that extraordinary people deserve whatever they can take. Spidey, who first saw Strand as somebody who understands what he's going through, quickly gets a bad vibe and declares them enemies. Boyd and Strand attack in retaliation, but Spider-Man escapes. So Strand begins a Spider-Man smear campaign. He gives Jameson unlimited budget to bash the wall crawler. Stories are printed in magazines and newspapers owned by Strand, and to top it all off, he gets thugs to dress as Spider-Man and commit crimes. Strand wants Spidey to hate humankind and be driven back to him. And it starts to get to Spider-Man, eventually stealing a bag of $20,000 from drug dealers that he stopped, justifying it in his mind that Aunt May needs an operation and that she can't pay for the house just on Social Security. He figured that being your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man would be easier as he went along. But at this point, he's still waiting. Peter ultimately decides to do the right thing and opens the bag of money. dumping it all on the people of New York as he swings. But it's one of the hardest choices he's ever had to make. Later, Spider-Man meets up with MJ and takes her to the top of the Brooklyn Bridge. As they stand atop, Spidey talks about spider mating rituals. He tells MJ to close her eyes, and we get to watch these high school seniors kiss on top of the bridge, with MJ's eyes closed the entire time. The next day, MJ seems happier, like all of her problems are solved, as she lets one of her project spiders crawl up her arm. Boyd, who had been following MJ for the previous 2 days, kidnaps her that night. Spidey tracks them down to Strand's mansion, but when he gets there, it's empty. But the bay of TV monitors are all paused. He presses play on the VCR, and a video begins to play of Strand with MJ as captive, telling Spidey to meet him on top of the World Trade Center. Spidey rips his way through the city until he crashes through the glass on the observation deck. Strand again tries to convince Spider-Man to join him, attempting to bribe him with $250 million in cash that he stole. But Spidey learned his lesson from the last time that he stole money. He was wrong in doing that, and that's a line that he will never cross again. Spidey and MJ flee to the roof of the tower, before quickly getting MJ to a stairwell to escape. Just then, Strand and Boyd show up, and Spider-Man begins to fight these two, Electro and Sandman, 2-on-1, in a climactic final battle atop the building. He eventually lassos Boyd and pulls him into one of Strand's blasts, turning him into molten glass. Spidey then pulls Strand over the side of the building with his web. They freefall as Spidey webs the other tower. They swing over and Spidey bangs into the side of the building, but Strand keeps falling and careens into the side of the wall with a sickening smack. Spider-Man pulls Strand's broken body to the top of the tower, and Strand has to know. He asks, "Who is Spider-Man?" Peter removes his mask and tells him his name, and Strand, in his dying breath, remarks that it's unbelievable that he was defeated by a high school senior. Peter takes all $250 million and sends it showering all over the streets of New York. Peter and MJ wind up getting an A+ on their biology project. But MJ doesn't care about the car anymore. In fact, she's going to go to a different school, get her grades up, and then try to get into medical school. She thanks Peter with a kiss, and realizes that it feels familiar. At this point, Peter reveals that he's Spider-Man, to MJ's delight and total surprise. Flash shows up and asks Peter to come with him. They walk around a corner, and Flash tries to pound Peter, but he dodges every single punch, humiliating him in front of everybody. MJ and Peter get accepted to different schools, but they see each other every weekend. Her grades are even better than his, but Peter blames it on the heavy hours as he swings off into the night to protect the city as the Amazing Spider-Man.